Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. Again, my name is Elona. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Today, we're going to cover one of the topic that comes up the most, especially when we receive phone calls from customers, but I also see it being asked in a lot of the dental portals as well, and that is designing remotely. So there are multiple ways of designing remotely, whether it is that you're opening a new office across the country, or you are have to quarantine for 2 weeks with everything that's going on right now. This is definitely a good option to have and use. And I want to go over all of the options that all of the types of setups that you can use for designing remotely, depending on what you might need it for. So we'll go over all of those. We'll go over having a standalone license, a VPN, right? That's something that comes up a lot, but what really is VPN and how it's used, and RDP, which is remote desktop access, basically. And then we're going to go over some standard configuration and maintenance of your 3Shape software that you can use to speed up how your software works in the office, but it's going to be especially more important if you're designing remotely because you want to minimize any types of slowdowns when you're having a connection that's not in the same office that can cause issues or delays. All right, so we'll start with designing remotely as a standalone setup. So basically how this setup works is that both the home office and the remote user will have a license. And the only connection between the two will be transferring the files back and forth. Granted, you do need an additional license for this. However, if you are, again, quarantining for 2 weeks or you're taking work at home, you can bring the license with you back and forth. And we'll go over how that setup can work for you. Or if you're a lab that has currently multiple design licenses and one of your new hires or one of your current hires needs to be working remotely for a period of time or permanently, you can have one of those licenses transfer over to a new physical dongle. It's very inexpensive to purchase a new physical dongle and have that remote user have their own license. This is definitely the easiest type of setup and probably the fastest. However, like I mentioned, it does require that design license. As far as transferring the files back and forth from your head office to the remote user or the remote office, there's multiple options. The built-in option with 3Shape, of course, is 3Shape Communicate Portal, which probably most of you are already using to receive files from dentists or from other laboratories. But you can also use any file transfer protocols like Dropbox or Google Drive or FTPs, any type of system that you're currently already using, possibly. All right, so the pros of this setup, again, it's very fast, it's very secure because there's no data being transferred over a network, basically, and very easy to configure. The cons is that it does require additional license. So if you currently are a lab that only has one license and can't afford a secondary one to be transferred to a remote user, then that can be a little bit expensive. Also, another con is that it doesn't share the database. So basically, the files have to be exported out of your current 3Shape and imported into the new one, whether that is by using 3Shape Communicate or by using one of the other file transfers that we discussed. As far as setup goes, there's a couple ways you can set up the remote office or the remote user. They can have the same type of install as a standalone, of course, and have all of the configuration or all of the settings that you currently have in your main control panel exported out of the main office and imported into that setup. So basically, it's cloning your original setup. The material libraries, the system settings, doctor information, anything like that. The other option that you have is you can set up the remote user as design center. So what that does basically is that any custom material settings that are set by the main office do not change when the case gets to the remote user and the case is designed. So it's same as if you're currently using a third-party design center to send jobs to for designing. Same would be if you're sending it to your own employee that's currently working remotely. All right. So to set yourself up as a, so if you're designing remotely and you want to clone the system after the install is done, you want to export your current systems or your main office systems, material information and settings. And you can do so by going into 3Shape control panel. Under Tools, selecting Import Export and selecting Export Materials. Of course, I'm going to go over in 3Shape real quick. Of course, you don't have to export everything. It will give you options to choose some if you don't want to transfer everything over. So basically, you would go under, so under Tools, Import Export, Export Materials, and select Export Materials. And here you can select all by clicking the very first button, or the square basically, or you can only select certain materials or certain settings. So if you're only designing crowns remotely, then by all means export just the crown information. If you're doing implants, then do just the implants. The easiest thing would be to do all, and then click Export. And you want to use the export to file option. That will create a file that's saved locally in your computer and can be transferred over email to the other computer for import purposes. And then the same way in the remote office, we'll go under, again, control panel, import export, import materials, and select that file from the location where it's saved, whether it's on the desktop or your downloads folder, if you're downloading it from your email. All right. The other option, like I mentioned, is you can set the remote office or the remote user as a design center. That way, none of this import-export has to happen, and the remote office does not make any changes to your existing settings. They just design the case and send it back, and it saves its original information, basically, as far as material libraries go. And you can do so by going under System Settings and selecting Design Center after scrolling down a little bit. That will set yourself up as a design center. It will not prompt you to select materials or change any of the material settings when you're designing. All right. The other option is designing to design remotely is VPN. So what is VPN? VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. Basically, each home office or main office will have their own local private network. And to access the office remotely, you use the internet. If there is no VPN, every information and data that is transferred over the network is accessible by anybody out there, basically. VPN creates these tunnels that allow for the information to be transferred securely from your head office to the remote office or to the remote user. Some bonus information: if you're using a Wi-Fi at an airport or a Starbucks, definitely try not to do any banking or any private transactions, because you're very vulnerable to hackers when there's no VPN connection used. All right, we'll go through some of the pros and cons of this type of setup. So designing using a VPN, the pros are that there's no lag, it's pretty fast, and there's a higher level of security. The cons are it is a little bit more difficult to set up. It does require IT for the initial setup and for maintaining it. There's a greater number of variables, so anything could go wrong or stop working. I mean, we're talking about network, and networks can go down, and the devices that network uses can cause issues as well. Also requires a more powerful PC if you're designing, if you're connecting through VPN from home. So the home PC has to have the same components as your main office PC as well, which is not something that is necessary for remote access, which is what we're going to talk about in a few minutes. All right, some VPN services that are available out there for you to use are OpenVPN, ExpressVPN, AnyConnect. Of course, if you Google many options will come up. ExpressVPN is one of the highest rated these days, and they do have a 3-month free trial, so definitely give it a try before you buy to even see if VPN is something that works for you. And then, it doesn't have to be the same type of VPN that you use. Definitely consult your IT. They do have more resources, and they also have the option to build your own VPN, which gives you a little bit more control in the configuration and the setup versus using an off-the-shelf VPN like the ones that are listed here. All right, so designing remotely over VPN also has multiple options that you can set up. So one is setting up a server and a standalone. So basically the server lives in your home office, whereas the standalone is going to be in your remote office or the remote user. And all that the VPN connection is enabling is the use of the license. So basically the home office has its own install and has its own database, its own material library, everything. So everything is local except for the license. So the only time that it's using the VPN connection is at the start of 3Shape, basically, just checking to make sure that your license is valid to design. But it doesn't continue that communication back and forth during your design, which is what could slow down your system and take a little bit longer. So it's that one-time check, or one time for every case check for the license, and then you're good to go. The other option is server client. So this one connects to your home office as if that was a server, and it's using that database, and it's using all of the case information from there. And the home office is set up as a client, same as you might have now if you have multiple computers in your office. So basically, a VPN works like as if the home PC was in the same network as your office. So it allows access to the entire office network. All right. So again, the license only lives in the main or head office. The remote user is set up as a standalone or a client. Or a client. If set up as a standalone, it still requires that file transfer that we discussed earlier if you were to have a separate license at home, right? So same rules apply. You can use 3Shape Communicate, or you can use any file transfer protocols out there, Dropbox, Google. We transfer anything that you're currently already using. So the VPN connection pros of a server and a standalone, it's fast. Like I mentioned, it only uses the connection when it's checking for the license. So it's a little bit faster than doing the server client setup. The con is that it doesn't share the database. You'd still have to do that manual export and import of the cases from the main office to the home or remote office. To do the install for the remote user or the remote office, you would select standalone during the installation process. And instead of, by default, usually has use local dongle checked. So you would uncheck that and browse to the location of where the license lives in your main office, which you're connecting to remotely via the VPN. Another way that you can connect to the license, sometimes it takes a lot longer to do the install when you're connecting to the license over a network. So it might be easier just for that initial setup to have the dongle physically plugged into that PC, if at all possible. So if you're using a laptop and it's in the office, do the installation in the office. Then you can change where the license lives by going into Control Panel and changing the computer name from this PC to the home or the main office PC, basically where your 3Shape server is. So going back to 3Shape Control Panel, under Tools, you would go under Subscription Management, and under Dongle Services, you do have to run the control panel as an admin. So right click and run as admin for it to allow you to change the license information here. And you can click on browse and locate the PC where the license lies in the home office. So that's the setup that you need to do if you already installed it with the dongle plugged in locally. Okay, as far as transferring files, 3Shape Communicate is a great tool for transferring files back and forth. Each office, so the main headquarters or office and the remote office or remote user will have to have two accounts so that they can communicate with each other, basically. To set up Communicate, you just go under Control Panel and select 3Shape Communicate. It will by default be disabled, so you would just click on Configure, Enable, and enter your information. To create an account, you can go under portal.3shapecommunicate.com, and it will allow you to go through the steps to create a 3Shape Communicate account. All right, as far as transferring the cases, so rather than using Communicate, if you want to use Dropbox or any other file transfer services, you would go under your 3Shape and right click on the case that you scanned in the office and want to send to your remote designer or your remote office for designing. You'd right click and under Advanced select the export option. It will give you multiple export files. So the one you want to choose is File, which will create a zipped folder, which is easier to transfer because it's much smaller in size. If you select Folder, it will just create a folder with all the files in it, just exactly like what you see in your 3Shape orders, basically, which you don't need to export because you already have it there. But using File will create a zip folder, which will make it easier to transfer, and it will make it easier to import into your 3Shape as well. And of course, you can choose where you want those files stored before you choose to send them. So maybe create a folder on your desktop and save all of the files there before you decide to send them off to the design center or designer or remote office all at the same time. And then the import works the same way. You would right click in your main case management screen in 3Shape. Under Advanced, click Import and select the option for Import Complete 3Shape orders. You do have the option to import multiple orders. So if you're sending 20 or 30 cases at the same time, they can import all 20 or 30 at the same time and start designing them instead of bringing them in one at a time. It saves a little bit of time. And the remote office will also have to navigate to where those files are saved. So if they're being transferred over Dropbox, maybe they have a Dropbox folder on their computer, or if they're emailed, they'll probably end up in the downloads folder if they're downloading from there. Okay, so the other VPN setup option is server client. So like I mentioned, the home office will have a setup that is same as if it was another computer. In the office, it has a client install and it's connecting to the server for license purposes, for the database purposes, and it has all of the same information as the server, same as if the computer was in the office as a second design center, basically. So the license lies there, and the files are already available, so nothing needs to be transferred back and forth. So of course, the pros of this kind of setup is that it has a shared database, so you don't need to be transferring the files back and forth. The files will be immediately available to the remote office or the remote user as soon as they're scanned in the main office, basically. The cons is there can be lag when opening and saving cases because everything is accessed remotely. The case information is accessed remotely every time it's saving. So by default, 3Shape saves every 5 minutes, I believe. So every 5 minutes it's saving, it's trying to communicate with an office that's not nearby. And it does have a little bit of slowdown during those times. But with a good VPN, with a good internet, it's probably going to be not as noticeable. Okay, so for the server client setup, instead of selecting a standalone, when doing the installation, you want to select network client. Same as, again, if you have another or secondary seat in your office. And of course, the support team can help with all of these. But if you're feeling adventurous and want to try it on your own, that's why I'm going over all these setups and these steps. Okay, so the other option, like I mentioned, is RDP, or remote access, or remote desktop, basically. So remote desktop, differently from VPN, gives you access to the computer. So anything that's on that computer, you will have access to remotely using a remote desktop software. It doesn't give you access to the whole network. It's just giving you access to that computer. Easy to set up. You will have everything ready to go as if you were in the office. Nothing changes. No files to be transferred. So it's pretty easy to use. So the pros is that because it's accessing a local computer in the office, it's using a local database. So again, no files need to be transferred. There's really no configuration needed except installing a remote desktop software. And the home office PC, or the remote user PC, doesn't have to be powerful at all. So it can be any computer, because all that PC is being used for is for this application that allows access to the main office PC, which is the one that has to be powerful. So basically, you're designing over a remote access, like maybe one that you're familiar with is TeamViewer. Like when your support team logs into your computer, we have capabilities to take over the design or do anything that we want to in your computer. That's what a remote desktop is. So the cons is there can be lag when trying to access a PC remotely, right? So it's very important that it's a good internet connection and a fast PC in the office as well to avoid that downtime as much as you can. The other con is that it does tie up a PC. So if the remote user is working full-time remotely, nobody else can use that PC in the office because the remote user will be using it constantly. So if you don't have extra seats in the office, then nobody can, you have a PC that is useless to people in the office. All right, and some services that you can try. There's a couple free options, thankfully, that you can certainly try, especially if this is something that you want to do temporarily, if you're traveling or doing a little bit of work from home afterwards to catch up. Anchor Free and Splashtop Personal are two free options. And then if this is a permanent setup, you probably want to do a better remote access option. And those are AnyDesk, Supremo, Mikogo, Splashtop. Of course, there's plenty more out there. These are just a few that we are familiar with and are highly rated. All of them have free trials, so definitely, again, try before you buy. And pretty inexpensive to purchase afterwards as well, as you can see. All right, so now we'll go over just a few standard maintenance things that you can do to avoid slowdowns. So again, this will be both for your slowdowns that you have in your office now, as well as, especially important if you're designing remotely, because you want to minimize slowdowns as much as possible. So system cleanup, I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with this option. It is on the newer versions of 3Shape, but there's some of them are available in older versions as well. So as far as system cleanup goes, in your 3Shape control panel, you can set it up so that it automatically closes orders. What that does is basically moves all of your 3Shape cases from your designed to your closed. That helps speed up the process when you're doing a search for a case or when it's trying to load up all of your cases in a database, because those are moved into a separate folder. It's not trying to access those files, and it speeds up the process of starting 3Shape accessing cases, searching for cases, and things like that. Another option is to automatically delete orders. One of the biggest slowdowns for your 3Shape system is your database, basically. There's two locations where your 3Shape files are stored. There's the 3Shape folder that you see in your C drive, right? And a lot of users think that removing or emptying that out and into an external hard drive solves the slowdown issue. That is just moving the files over. It's not removing the case from your 3Shape. So you can test it out, or maybe you already have noticed where if you move a file, you can still search for that case in 3Shape. It will still be there. If you click on it, it will have the little exclamation point that says files are not available because they've been moved. However, the case is still there. So that is what slows down your 3Shape. Not the files being in your C drive, it's the cases being in the database, which is in your actual software. So to clean up the database, the cases have to be deleted from 3Shape, not from C drive. Very important that when deleting the cases from 3Shape, especially if you're deleting manually, you move the files out of your 3Shape folder first. Otherwise, they will both be deleted, and unfortunately, it doesn't go in your bin, so you can't recover it anymore. So definitely move the cases first, and then delete. And I think this should be done as a monthly maintenance if you're doing this manually. But in Control Panel, now you have an option to automatically delete orders, and that will give you the option to delete the cases from your database, but not touch the cases out of 3Shape. However, if you do want to do both cleanups, you can tell 3Shape in Control Panel to delete the cases as well. You just have to remember to move them, or you can work with your IT and they can actually automate that process for you as well, where all the files are automatically moved once a month, once a week, whatever you decide, into a separate location so that they're not lost. The case information is not lost. And you can always re-import this case into 3Shape. So deleting the case out of 3Shape doesn't mean that you can't do anything with it anymore. If you're storing it somewhere else, you can always import it, and it will be same as if it never left your 3Shape. All the information will be there, the design will be there, the customer information, if you entered it, will be there. Nothing changes. Another option is to automatically delete 3Shape Communicate invalid orders. If you're using 3Shape Communicate, you might have run into certain times when the case just doesn't show up in your inbox. They do go into an invalid folder that can slow down 3Shape, because every time it's trying to refresh so that it brings new cases in, it keeps attempting to import that invalid case as well. So 3Shape can automatically delete that, and it's not gone, especially in the newer versions. You know, there's an advanced import option where you can manually bring in the case. So even if it's a good case and deleted, you can always bring it back, thankfully. It's a great feature, and I absolutely love it. Another thing that Control Panel or 3Shape can automatically do for you is database defragmentation. Basically, there's a limit into the database space, and defragmenting will shrink the database so that it's using less space, and that can also speed up the system performance. So those can all be found under Control Panel, System Cleanup, and there's definitely more options that you can review and see if they work for you. These are just the 4 that I thought would be worth mentioning. So 3Shape Control Panel, System Cleanup. By default, these are all unchecked, of course. So you check them and you can choose if you want to keep the cases for 30 days, 90 days. It can be changed to whatever number you want. And then this is what I was mentioning, where you can tell 3Shape to automatically delete only the cases out of the database, but not the files. So you want this checked to keep the files. If you want to delete the file, so if you have your IT automatically moving the cases, or if you're manually moving the cases into an external hard drive or another network location or another location in the same PC, you can uncheck that so that it automatically deletes both the case out of the database, which is out of your 3Shape, as well as the case folder. You definitely want to keep your local hard drive under control as well. If you've had the same PC for a long time and you're a high volume customer, that you can run out of memory pretty quickly if you're keeping the cases forever. All right, and here's where you can set up the automatically delete 3Shape communicate invalid orders and the automatically close orders. Yes, that was the first one that I mentioned. All right. Okay, so just so you have an idea, when you have the automatically close orders option turned on, and you can, by the way, close the orders manually as well, you just right click and close. They go under this folder. This definitely is a new icon for close orders, and it says ship now, only in 2021.2. So if you're running any version that's a little bit older, will look a little bit different, the icon, and it will only say close, it will not say shipped. But that's something you've probably seen before and wondered what it is. As from what I've noticed, it's not very commonly used feature. And then as far as invalid orders go, you can see if you have those, if you want, under 3Shape Communicate tab, and by clicking on invalid orders. You can certainly delete them manually as well if you feel like that's probably easier to do, or if you don't get as many of those. All right. Another thing that you can do to speed up your either the 3Shape performance or your workflow, right? So there's a lot of design options that you can choose in 3Shape. You may have noticed if you've upgraded to the more recent versions that now all of the cases have this prepare step that it walks you through. It basically, asks you if you want to refine the scans or trim them or prepare them in any way, which normally is done as part of the scanning process. So you can set it up in your control panel so that it skips that step. Skipping that step doesn't mean you don't have the option to go to it if you want to. It's just not stopping there, not making or forcing you to click next to move to the next step. So you can always go back if you need to. But if you find that you're always skipping that step manually by clicking next and you can't wait to get to the part where you actually need to do the work, then you can turn that option on in 3Shape so you don't have to manually do it each time. Another option that usually is checked by default is automatically connect to anatomy. If this works for you, great. But if you find that you're always having to disconnect so that you can change the shape or the rotation or the size of the crown, then maybe it's not a good option for you, depending on your workflow and depending on the type of design that you're doing. You might have, a lot of instances, especially with cantilevers, where the crown size is completely off or it's rotated. And if it's already connected to the margin, every time you change the size or the rotation of the crown, it's changing the shape of the margin so you don't see that clear, sharp edge around it. And that sometimes can cause milling issues too. So if you notice that you have those, or if you notice that you're always having to click the undo button on the bottom to disconnect the crown from margin, then maybe that's an option that you can turn off. Another one is use new margin line detection algorithm. And again, if it's working for you, it's a great tool. If you find that it's not working for you and you find that you're always having to manually do it, then uncheck it so the software doesn't waste time trying to do it for you. Same with enforcing minimum thickness algorithm. It's a choice between, do you want to do it manually if you are doing it, or do you want the software to do it for you? So if you find that you're doing it manually anyway, then maybe turn that option off so that it doesn't use time or waste time waiting for the software to do it for you. And all of these can be found under, again, control panel. Everything is a control panel under system settings, design options. So these are some of the design options. And again, I only brought up 4 that are frequent that we run into, but you can certainly go through and see which other ones you might use or not use. And if they're checked and you're not using them or you don't want them to be checked, uncheck, and vice versa. I would say if you know for sure that you want the software to automatically do any of these steps where you have it checked, otherwise start with all of them unchecked and go from there. Another thing in control panel is auto workflow. So crown auto placement, again, it's a great tool if it's working correctly, depending on the smile library you're using or the type of scans you have, it sometimes does a perfect job for it. But if you find that you're always having to move that crown, then maybe turn that option off if it's checked, or turn it off and turn it on if it's not, and you think it works well. Desired cut to antagonist and cut to neighbor. So both of those tools are great tools. Usually you have to do those anyway. If you find that you're not using the automatic cut to antagonist or neighbors, then turn those off. If you find that you're changing the value of how much you're cutting to antagonists and cut neighbors manually each time, then this is the place where you would do it once and not change it again. So under system settings, design options, the defaults for cut to antagonists and cut to neighbors will be 0.05. Again, if you want those to be done automatically and those values don't work for you, change the values so they work for you, so you don't have to manually change it each time during the design workflow. Oh. All right, a few other things that you can do to avoid downtime or slowdowns. So system backup, this is something that we went over, right, doing that export and import. When you do that material export, that's going to be all of your files that you need. So if your computer crashes and you have to purchase a new computer, you have to do a brand new installation of 3Shape, that will have all of your previous information. So your material libraries, your implant libraries, doctor information is well kept. If you have any custom order setup, anything basically that you were doing before will be there for you to import if you have to do a completely new install. So that helps with getting you back to exactly where you were a little bit faster, right? So save that file somewhere for in case of those instances where something might happen that you just lose access to everything. System upgrades, it's very important that you stay current. So every once in a while, things will stop working because a graphics card driver updates changed some setting that doesn't work with older versions. And this goes for any software, not just 3Shape, really. 3Shape can only go back 3 years as far as opening up designs. So if you're currently on 2017 and you try and install 2021, you won't be able to open up a 2017 case. So staying current will also help with making sure that the files are updated consistently so that you can easily access any old cases from at any point in time. So you don't have to worry about is it still compatible or not, losing that information. I would recommend that every once in a while, if you've been a 3Shape user for 10, 12 years and you've never done a clean install, one, you probably need a new computer. And two, you probably have a lot of materials in there that you're not using anymore, especially implant libraries. That's probably the second most common thing that causes slowdowns besides the database. And if there's implant libraries that you're not using, definitely don't import them as a just in case I need it in the future. Only import the bare minimum, only what you need. For one, it will not slow down your system by overloading it with the material information. There's less risk of the material file being corrupt, which I don't know if you run into, but that's something that happens quite often. And it doesn't take much longer for you to open up the software because it's trying to load all that information. And it's easier even when you set up the order form. So getting to what you need down the implant library list when you have only the 2, 3, or 5 implant libraries that you're using is easier than scrolling through dozens of material libraries or implant libraries. Those can easily be deleted as well out of your control panel, and I can show you that in a minute. So if you imported an implant library last year because you needed to use it for one case, you can always just delete it again. Another thing is when you're importing, it always gives you the option to import all or some, just like I showed you where you have the option to export all or some. Only import what you need when it comes to implant libraries or material libraries so that you don't overload the system. But a clean install not only will give you like a fresh start, a clean slate, you only import the implant libraries and the material libraries that you need, but also all of these libraries get updated. So, again, if you've been a 3Shape user for a long time, you will every once in a while run into that instance where you're trying to use a implant library and it's not generating the STL, or it's not giving you the correct scan flag option because it's an old version. So that clean install will give you again a clean slate to import the most current implant libraries that are released by manufacturers, which actually can also be accessed from control panel. Majority of them can. You can import directly from there, so you don't even need to access. You don't even need to reach out to manufacturers anymore. But it's definitely improving the performance of your 3Shape software. So probably at least every 5 years, I would say do a clean install. If you can afford to do it every 3, that's perfect too. A backup dongle. This is something that is a very easy safety thing to do. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but it does happen frequently enough to where the investment is worth it. The dongle is your USB drive that you plug into the back of the PC. It's like any hardware, it can get damaged over time. It can overheat, it can get kicked, especially if you plug it into the front of the PC and be accidentally damaged. Purchasing a backup dongle, it's I think around $100. Don't quote me on that. Definitely check with your sales rep, but it's very inexpensive and it can avoid 1 to 3 days or longer downtime. So if that breaks, whether it's because the hardware failed or because it got physical damage, having that backup dongle will be easy to have all of your licenses transferred over in a matter of a couple hours versus waiting a couple days or longer for the new physical dongle to come in so that you can resume your work. So definitely invest in that backup. Let me go over what I just mentioned in control panel. So if you go under materials, you can certainly clean up your system there as far as materials that you're not currently using. Just click and delete. And then implant library is the same. You go under implant systems and scroll through the implant systems that you have available there. And anything that you're not using, you can click there and delete so that you can clean up your system a little bit. So that's a way to manually clean it up. Okay. And that is all that I had for you. I will leave you with some information how to contact our technical support. There's multiple ways of reaching out. You can certainly call. That's probably the preferred way. But you can also go into our knowledge base by going to zahndental.com. You can access our technical support section. And in knowledge base, you can either create your own ticket with a brief description of what's going on, or you can chat with us. That also seems to be something that is a preferred communication method these days. So now at this point, I can open it up for questions.
Thank you, Elona. We do have a few questions. So the first one I have is, can I do this with any version of 3Shape?
Okay, so I briefly covered this, right? So the VPN connection can be done with any version of 3Shape. Again, I strongly recommend that you stay as current as you can, but it can be done with any version of 3Shape. As far as some of the automations that I mentioned, majority of them can be done, but definitely go into the locations that I mentioned and check or contact support and see what other options older versions of software have as far as automation of the workflow or cleanup goes.
Great, and the next one is, how do I determine which is best for my current situation?
So that's definitely not a one-size-fits-all type of setup. It really depends. I say to communicate with your technical support team, communicate with your IT, and support team is willing to work with your IT directly so that we can come up with what's best for you, right? So if you're a small one-person lab and you're doing this remote work temporarily for a couple weeks because you have to quarantine, or you're trying to catch up on extra work in the afternoon, probably the fastest and cheapest way is to just, if you have a laptop, have a local install, bring the dongle with you, or use the remote access. The remote access doesn't require a powerful PC. If you have a personal laptop that you're using for personal things, and it's not a gaming laptop with heavy-duty graphics card and CPU, then probably the best option for you is the remote access. But if you have a full-time employee, then that might not be the best option, right? You want to invest more if you have a remote office or a remote full-time employee. I hope that answers the question.
The next question is there a way for 3Shape to move data from the server onto another network or HDD off the computer instead of deleting cases altogether?
Okay, so if I understand this correctly, this is in regards to the 3Shape auto deleting cases out of control panel. Unfortunately, there is no option now to tell it to move the files instead of either deleting them or leaving them. I wish there was. That's why I recommended that you reach out to your IT if you have an IT, that they can set up a system for you that automatically does that. Hopefully they are working on something like that to where the files can be moved or stored elsewhere other than just locally, so that you don't have to do that. But at this time, unfortunately, it's not possible.
Okay, and the next one, is this officially supported by 3Shape?
So the VPN connection itself is not officially supported because there's a lot of IT involvement and network issues that technical support team mainly focuses on application support, right? However, just like our team, they are willing to help. A lot of times, we know where issues reside, or we are familiar with things that could go wrong simply by working with our customers. So at the very least, we can definitely help determine whether the issue is 3Shape software related or PC related or network related, and give you the proper tools and information to reach out to your IT so that you know exactly what to ask and what needs to be done, if we can't help fix it.